You know those stories that sound just a little too weird to be true? The ones about lost cities, mythical beasts, or ancient technologies that seem completely impossible. We usually file them away as folklore or fairy tales. But what if some of them weren't so fake after all? Today we're looking at those beautiful moments when science had to awkwardly clear its throat and admit that, oops, that myth was actually a fact. Let's get right into it. Number 6 is the Hairy Bogeyman. For centuries, Western explorers in West Africa heard tales from local guides about a terrifying creature lurking deep in the jungle. It was described as a massive, hairy, wild man of the woods that was immensely powerful and decidedly not human. To the European naturalists back home, sitting comfortably in their wood-paneled studies, this sounded like pure nonsense. A giant, undiscovered ape-man. It was obviously just a garbled description of a chimpanzee, or a folktale invented to scare kids away from wandering into the forest. For the better part of a century, the scientific community dismissed the idea entirely. It was a myth, a sailor's yarn, a ghost story. Then, in 1847, an American missionary and naturalist named Thomas Stoughton Savage was shown a skull that changed everything. It was clearly the skull of an ape, but it was enormous, far larger and more powerful than any known chimpanzee. He had found the source of the legend. He gave it the scientific name troglodytes gorilla, and just like that, the boogeyman was real. The mythical creature had been there all along, peacefully eating plants, while the world's greatest minds insisted it was a fantasy. It's the scientific equivalent of your entire neighborhood swearing there's a 6-foot-tall squirrel living in the park. And for decades, experts patiently explain that that's biologically impossible. Then one day, a biologist shows up with a giant, fluffy-tailed rodent on a leash and sheepishly asks if anyone has a spare acorn the size of a bowling ball. It's a great reminder that sometimes, the people who actually live somewhere have a better grasp on reality than an expert 1,000 miles away. The gorilla just wasn't interested in being discovered yet. Number 5 is the ship-sized squid. If you've ever looked at the ocean and felt a deep, primal sense of nope, you can probably thank stories of the kraken. For centuries, sailors in the North Atlantic told tales of a sea monster of horrifying size. A colossal beast with tentacles as thick as a ship's mast that could supposedly drag entire vessels and their crews down to the crushing depths. It was the ultimate nightmare, a symbol of the terrifying, unknowable power of the sea. To scientists and scholars on dry land, the kraken was the poster child for a fisherman's tall tale. It was pure fiction, a legend spun by superstitious sailors with overactive imaginations. Sure, squids were real, but one large enough to wrestle a boat was dismissed as biologically absurd. Any evidence, like giant, rubbery arms washing up on a beach, was explained away as a piece of a whale or some other known, less exciting animal. The official consensus was that the kraken belonged in storybooks, not biology books, but the eyewitness accounts from sailors and the bizarre, fleshy things washing ashore never stopped. Finally, in the 1850s, Danish naturalist Japetus Steenstrup examined a large squid beak and other fragments, and did what no one had dared to do before. He took the stories seriously. He officially described the species Architeuthis dux, the giant squid. Decades later, we started finding whole specimens, behemoths with eyes the size of dinner plates. Then we discovered the colossal squid, an even heavier, more robust cousin. They might not be actively hunting ships, but a 45-foot-long invertebrate getting tangled in your rigging would definitely feel like the myth coming to life. Science had to finally admit that the old sea dogs weren't crazy. They were just underfunded marine biologists. Number 4 is the city from the poem. Anyone who sat through a high school literature class knows the story of the Trojan War. The face that launched 1,000 ships, the great heroes Achilles and Hector, and that one time a giant wooden horse was the world's worst housewarming gift. For literally thousands of years, Homer's epic poem, the Iliad, was considered one of the greatest stories ever told. And for most of that time, that's all it was seen as, a story. A foundational myth. Scholars and historians were in wide agreement that the city of Troy was a fictional setting, a literary invention like King's Landing or Emerald City. It was a brilliant backdrop for a tale about honor, pride, and the folly of war, but there was no serious belief that it was a real, physical place you could visit. It was folklore, not a history lesson. That is, until a wealthy German businessman named Heinrich Schliemann came along in the 1870s. Schliemann was obsessed with Homer's epics, but he didn't read them as fiction. He read them as a travel guide. Against the advice of every serious academic, Schliemann used the geographical clues in the Iliad to identify a specific hill in modern-day Turkey, and he just started digging. The establishment thought he was a fool, a rich guy on a vanity project, and then he found it. Not just one city, but a layer cake of 9 different cities built on top of one another. One of these layers, now called Troy VII, showed clear evidence of a major conflict and fire right around the time the Trojan War was thought to have happened. While archaeologists still argue about Schliemann's less-than-scientific methods, the core fact remains: the mythical city of Troy was real. Homer wasn't just making things up, he was reporting from history. Number 3 is the Magical Norse Compass. We all know the Vikings were incredible sailors. They navigated the cold, unforgiving waters of the North Atlantic to colonize Iceland, Greenland, and even reach North America, all centuries before the magnetic compass was common in Europe. How did they manage this incredible feat, especially on those famously gray, foggy days when the sun was completely hidden from view? Well, if you read the old Norse sagas, the answer was simple. They used a magical solarstein, or sunstone. According to the legends, this was a special crystal that, when held up to the sky, could magically reveal the sun's true position, even in the thickest clouds or fog. For centuries, historians and scientists dismissed this as pure fantasy. A magic rock that finds the sun sounded like an item you'd find in a video game, not a real navigational tool. There was no archaeological evidence for them, so it was written off as a poetic way of saying the Vikings were just really, really good at sailing. But then, a theory emerged that was even cooler than magic. What if it was just physics? In the 1960s, an archaeologist suggested that the sunstone could have been a piece of a specific type of crystal, like Iceland spar, which has a property called polarization. This crystal splits light beams in a very particular way. By rotating the crystal while looking at the sky, a navigator could see a pattern that would align perfectly with the sun's hidden position. Modern experiments have proven that this technique is shockingly accurate. The sagas weren't describing magic, they were describing a sophisticated scientific instrument. The Vikings didn't have a gift from the gods. They had a pocket-sized, all-weather solar compass 1,000 years before anyone else. Number 2 is the Arsonist Birds. When you think of the causes of wildfires, you probably think of lightning strikes or careless campers. You probably don't think of a bird flying through the smoke, deliberately carrying a flaming stick in its talons to start a new fire on purpose. And for a long time, neither did Western science. But for decades, Aboriginal peoples in northern Australia had been telling stories about exactly that. These stories described firehawks, specific species of kites and falcons that had learned to wield fire as a hunting tool. According to the accounts, these birds would swoop down to the edge of an existing brushfire, pick up a smoldering twig, fly to an area of unburnt grass, and drop it, igniting a new blaze. The motive was brilliantly simple. Starting a new fire front would flush out all the lizards, snakes, and insects trying to hide, creating a convenient, self-serve buffet for the birds. It was a stunning claim of animal intelligence and tool use. To most ornithologists and scientists, this sounded like pure folklore. An amazing story, but biologically improbable. An animal intentionally spreading fire? That was a cognitive leap thought to be unique to humans. The behavior was written off as a myth, a way to explain the often unpredictable nature of wildfires. But the accounts from numerous indigenous groups across the continent were too detailed and too consistent. Finally, in 2017, after collaborating with Aboriginal land managers, a team of scientists published a paper that officially confirmed it. They had observed and documented the behavior multiple times. The firehawks were real. The myth was just an accurate field report that had been ignored for 200 years. And at number 1, we have the story that saved a generation. Some myths try to explain how the world was made, But what if a myth wasn't an explanation, but an instruction manual? A set of directions on how to survive a disaster so immense that it happens only once every few centuries. In the Pacific Northwest, indigenous peoples have long told stories about a cataclysmic battle between the thunderbird and the whale, which caused the ground to shake so violently it felt like the world was ending, and the ocean to pull back from the shore, only to return in a single, colossal wave. To outsiders, these were classic creation myths, powerful metaphors for the forces of nature. Geologists were particularly skeptical, as there were no historical records of a tsunami-generating earthquake of that magnitude ever hitting the region. The stories were seen as beautiful folklore, not an eyewitness account. Then, in the 20th century, scientists started finding strange clues. They uncovered ghost forests, entire groves of dead cedar trees that had all died at once when the coastline suddenly dropped, flooding their roots with salt water. They found layers of sand deposited far inland, evidence of a massive, ancient tsunami. By cross-referencing this with records of a mysterious orphan tsunami that struck Japan in January of 1700, they pieced it together. A magnitude 9.0 earthquake had ruptured the entire Cascadia fault line. The indigenous stories weren't myths at all. They were precise, accurate oral histories of that exact event. The shaking earth and the receding tide weren't metaphors, they were observations. And embedded in these stories was a crucial piece of information passed down for over 300 years. If the ground shakes for a long time and the ocean disappears, run to high ground immediately. The myth was a perfect, life-saving disaster plan. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most important facts aren't written in a textbook, but are carried in a story. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.